Welcome to the release of the Lowe CMC, Los Angeles County Consumer Sentiment Index for the second quarter of 2017. My name is Cameron Shelton. I'm the McMahon Family Associate Professor of Political Economy here at Claremont McKenna College and the current director of the Lowe Institute of Political Economy, which produces the index. Before we turn to the release and the current data, I want to present to you two upcoming improvements in the production of the index. First, given our interest in Los Angeles County, we are expanding into two new counties. We are adding Orange County and we're adding the Inland Empire, and we're currently collecting data for these indices, which will be released later in the year. Second, in order to provide for this expansion, we have partnered with Chapman University. And in the spirit of that partnership and cooperation, we have to present, we have Professor Marc Weidenmier, Professor of Economics at Chapman University, formerly of Claremont McKenna College, and the past director of the Lowe Institute. And it was under his auspices that this index was initiated. So he and I will be working moving forward to produce this and the expanded indices. So take it away, Mark.
All right, thank you, Cameron. I'd like to thank everybody for getting online and checking out our live stream release of the second quarter results for the Los Angeles Consumer Sentiment Index. So I'd like to start off by sort of motivating why are we interested in consumer sentiment. So Consumer Sentiment Index is a measure of expectations regarding future consumption. And consumption currently makes up about 70% of U.S. economic activity. So what existing consumer sentiment indices are out there? Well, there's really two famous ones, two well-known ones. There's the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index, and there's also the Conference Board collects data and produces their own Consumer Sentiment Index. And both of these indices are national level measures. There are also some state level measures where various universities or private companies construct consumer sentiment indices for states across the United States. However, we are unaware of any consumer sentiment index for a major metropolitan area in the United States. And Los Angeles is the second largest city in the U.S. And so we view this as an opportunity to provide the local economy, to provide information to businesses in Los Angeles and also throughout the nation about future economic activity in the United States. Okay. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about how the Consumer Sentiment Index for Los Angeles County is constructed. We ask a random sample of 500 people, stratified on the basis of age, race, gender, ethnicity, and zip code, a series of 7 questions. And these questions are basically asking, what do you think about, current economic conditions and future economic conditions? And so what I'd like to do is go through each of these 7 questions. So question number 1 is, do you think that a year from now you and your family will be better off financially, worse off financially, or about the same? Question 2, do you think that business conditions in the United States during the next year will be better, worse, or about the same? Question 3, during your last few months, have business conditions in Los Angeles improved your economic situation, worsened your economic situation, or had no effect on your economic situation? Question 4, are current business conditions in Los Angeles better than a year ago, worse than a year ago, or the same as a year ago? Question 5, a year from now, do you expect that overall business conditions in the United States will improve your family's economic situation, worsen your family's economic situation, allow your family's economic situation to remain the same? And then our last 2 questions. Question 6, complete the following statement. Compared to today, if you lost your job within the next year, you think you would have a better chance, a worse chance, or about the same chance at finding a new job. And then the last question, which is a very common question that you see in consumer sentiment indices, do you think next year will be a good time to buy an automobile or a bad time to buy an automobile? Okay, so if you notice, there's a pattern in all of these questions. We have a positive response, we have a neutral response, and we have a negative response. And so we use the positive, the neutral, and the negative responses to construct a sentiment index. And so how is the consumer sentiment index for Los Angeles County constructed? Well, it's actually quite simple. We calculate the fraction of positive responses for each question. We then calculate the fraction of negative responses for each question, and then we compute the difference. We then add to the difference constructed, okay, in part 3. Then we sum up the value of the indices constructed from the 7 questions, and then we divide the value by the base index. So we chose the second quarter of 2015 when we began to collect data as our base quarter. And then we multiply by 100. Okay? So when we do this, we generate our new values, our values for Los Angeles consumer sentiment for each quarter. So if you look, what's sort of notable in our picture here is we have this large sort of surge in consumer sentiment leading into the presidential election last year. And then we have this large drop following the election of Trump. So as we noted in our press releases earlier this year, we felt that this largely reflects sort of expectations of a Clinton election, followed by the decline with the election of Trump. And we thought that given that Trump's policies, at least he ran on a platform of anti-free trade and anti-immigration, these would potentially have negative consequences for Los Angeles County. Well, we've continued on this downward trajectory, okay? And so in the first quarter of 2017, we had an index value of about 103.7, and our second quarter reading is approximately 96.5. So that's about a 7% drop, okay? And so what I'd like to do now is look a little bit in detail about what's driving this drop in Los Angeles consumer sentiment. It's really being driven by 3 questions. This is a national question, okay, about where the U.S. economy is headed. This is a local question, question 3, okay, about business conditions. And then question 9 is a local question about employment opportunities going forward. Okay, so what this shows is that the largest drop in the sentiment index is from question 2, which is about what's going on in the United States. So this suggests that Los Angeles, the survey respondents seem to be quite concerned about future economic conditions in the United States. Okay, so I'd like to sort of highlight what some of the main drivers of the drop in LA consumer sentiment have been over the last quarter. And what's really notable here is the age group 45 to 54. Okay, this tends to be peak earners. People often experience their largest salaries during this time in their life. Okay, because they've been out of school for a while, and they also have some experience. So we tend to see earnings peak around this time. We also have young people drop quite a bit, which tends to be we tend to see this associated with Trump's policies. But we have this big drop here from ages 45 to 54. Now, one interpretation of this is that there's this group may have been expecting sort of a tax cut at the national level, which was one of the platforms of President Trump, which hasn't made it through Congress yet. So things have tended to stall there. Okay, gender. Okay, again, we see a large drop in males. So in the first graph, we have a drop in groups which tend to be better off economically. Okay, we see a large drop in the males, minus 15% from the quarter, from the last drop since the last quarter. And then if we look at ethnicity, again, the big driver here is there's a 26% drop in consumer sentiment from Caucasians. Okay? So what is our sort of big takeaway from all of this? Well, our sort of takeaway is that a lot of this has to do with Trumponomics. Okay? What we've seen in the data in Trumponomics, first off, what is Trumponomics? That's basically the economic policies or the economic policy supported by the Trump administration. And what we've seen, at least in Los Angeles, is we've seen, if we go back, 3 groups that are more likely to support Trump or be at least more open to the Trump administration. We have the age groups from 45 to 54, which tend to be higher earning groups. They tend to be more conservative. Okay. We have gender. Okay, men tend to be more likely to be Republican. And we have whites also tend to be more likely to be Republican. So one interpretation of our results is that, you know, a lot of supporters or people who might lean a little to lean towards the Republican agenda have sort of come to the point, or they sort of come to the sort of conclusion that at least in the short run, a lot of the policies and platforms that Trump had promised in the election simply haven't gone through Congress. They've been stalled. Okay, so we can talk about 3 of those would be healthcare, infrastructure, and perhaps the biggest is tax reform. Okay, now I think that at least we don't know where these are headed, but going forward, probably the most likely one where we might see some action is in tax reform. There is some bipartisan support for reducing, let's say, corporate taxes, which has played a significant role in the large run-up of the stock market of the last year. And perhaps there'll also be some other tax reform. But the bottom line is there's been a lot of uncertainty in the national level for economic policy going forward, and that appears to have impacted consumer sentiment among Los Angeles groups who would tend, you would think, to be more favorable towards Republican policies. Thank you. I now open the floor to questions.
Okay, I have a question, Professor. Thank you for doing this. Have economists gone back and correlated these consumer sentiment indices with actual economic results? In other words, do they predict
yes, and that
correlation with what actually will happen?
Yes. So, well, what you're most interested in is predicting recessions. Okay. So Ed Leamer, years ago, he has a book he wrote for his MBA class, and he took the like 10 or 15 different economic indicators. And he said, well, which ones predict recessions the best looking forward? Okay. And consumer sentiment is one of the top 5. And one of the reasons we selected consumer sentiment is because most of the other indicators are national. So if you look at interest rates in particular yield spreads, okay, and interest rate differentials between long-term and short-term government interest rates tend to be good predictors of recessions. Okay, well, interest rates are determined in a national market, so they don't give you local information. Okay, so that's a big one. Another one is housing starts. You could and generally that's looked at the national level. There are some local data. And then the other one, stock market. People will sometimes use the stock market, but the stock market tends to predict 20 of the next 10 recessions. Okay, so but stock markets do have some ability to predict recessions, but again, that's a national measure. So when you're looking at local economic activity and you want to predict where the economy is headed in the future, consumer sentiment is one of your best choices. Okay, and so that's why we selected that.
Thank you.
Sure.
I have a question as well. So what should we be looking for going forward? Maybe what are your expectations?
That's a good question. You know, obviously there's a degree of uncertainty with trying to predict the future. But if we look at, let's say, the Michigan survey, the Michigan survey is at a 9-month low. And our California, Los Angeles surveys largely led the Michigan survey going down, and we would argue that's because California tends to lead the business cycle. Okay, that's another reason why we started this survey, is because California tends to lead the national business cycle historically. And so one of the things we know is that, at least for the Michigan survey, that the Michigan survey, which is benchmarked to 1964, the Michigan survey finds that economic growth in a slow range, let's say of about where we are right now, the U.S. economy is growing right around 2% a year. First half of the year grew at 1.9%. They find that the national survey has values in the 90s often, when the growth rate of the U.S. economy is about 2%. And so we're in the 90s right now. We only have 9 quarters of data, but it is sort of consistent with that idea that we have slow growth. It's unclear if we're headed for a recession, but at least in the near term, it looks like we're in an area of slow but steady growth. And so the question is will it continue to drop? But at least right now, I would say that the results are now pretty consistent with the level of growth. One concerning issue is in the last EDD release that came out, I guess a week or so ago, is that Los Angeles did lose 1,500 jobs in June, so for the initial release. But anyway, so I think right now at least the numbers are pretty consistent with slow and steady growth. And the question is, will that continue, or will we have another shock which may push the index down farther?
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.